In the first scene, two friends travel to what appears to be a mystical island in search of a lost treasure. Nothing except water surrounds it on all sides, and not a single organism exists there. As the friends slowly approach the island, it abruptly begins to move. To their astonishment, they discover that the island is actually a huge blue whale that has been tethered. The scene then jumps to a few weeks earlier. A magnificent white mare gallops across a wide wheat field at midnight, leaving a trail of brilliant light in its wake. The following morning, an elderly farmer gathers his 3 sons to show them the deplorable state of their destroyed wheat crop. The man tells his sons to stay watch at night because their only source of income is being destroyed, in the hopes of catching the perpetrator. The youngest brother, John, is then given this duty by the elder brothers. John is frightened of the dark and is aware of how big the task at hand is, but he agrees to keep watch in order to earn his father's trust. The hedgehog John previously saved strikes up a cordial discussion with John in the evening. He is conversing when he sees the mare's shadow and immediately tosses a rope in its general direction. The mare suddenly starts to drag John through the fields and meadows as the rope tightens. At one point, he is even pulled through the air, from where he can see the lovely village. John is enthralled by the scene and starts yelling with delight. His good fortune, however, is short-lived as they both fall into a bog after the mare crashes. Although John succeeds in freeing himself, the mare is still unable to move. When John sees the poor animal drowning, he abandons his goal and instead tries to save it. He tries to remove the enormous mare by himself, but the beast won't even move. So he starts up a local wheat mill and eventually saves it. The mare cries out in tears of gratitude, which deeply affects John. The mare is then freed from its restraints after promising to stop trampling their farms. After the mare leaves, John notices the empty wheat field and understands that he will be responsible for the damage. The morning following the event, John awakens at the stable and is astounded to see 2 stunning black royal horror stallions. He is startled to hear a voice in the background as he takes in the sight of these monsters. He reacts swiftly and takes a pitchfork to try and defend himself. John is shocked to discover a tiny humpbacked magic foal when he gets closer to the source of the noise. He has a miraculous ability to speak in a human voice. Foal reveals to John that the mare he had earlier encountered is his mother and that she has given him these 2 horses, with Foal himself accompanying John. Soon after, when the old farmer sees the plight of the damaged wheat field, he yells out in despair, alarming John. As they flee the pitch at great speed, Foal quickly takes action after sensing the problematic situation. He carries John on his back. John reveals his wish to sell the horses along the trip in order to get some much-needed cash. Foal offers to assist once more and issues a loud whistle to signal the horses to their location. Previously, John's family was able to capture them. The group now embarks on a journey to the busy market town with the gorgeous horses in tow in the hopes of finding a suitable bidder. When John gets there, he is inundated with offers from buyers eager to get their hands on the majestic horses. But out of greed, he decides to keep the animals and only sells them to the wealthiest local. It turns out that individual is none other than the king. The monarch notices the horses as John approaches the magnificent palace and is enthralled. He claims that a poor farmer like John could never have afforded the horses on his own, so rather than buying them like a gentleman, he commands his men to seize them. In need of assistance and feeling despondent, John goes to Foal. The horses are called back to John's side by the latter's whistle, but when they do so, they knock the king down and into a nearby bag of flour. The king is furious, yet he maintains his cool in front of the assembled people. After that, John suggests a deal, asking for 2 silver hats in exchange for the horses. One of the king's courtiers, however, points out that the horses are obligated to keep returning to John. The king provides him the prestigious position of the most significant groom in the palace in light of this. John readily accepts since he is overjoyed to have been given the chance. As a result of the announcement, the entire crowd also begins to applaud for John. They think he is the so-called animal whisperer. The monarch grows resentful of John as he enjoys rising popularity among the populace, seeks to execute him in some way. He searches for a justification, but he cannot find one. However, his courtier gives him a suggestion one day. He must assign John to a mission to catch the fabled firebird in accordance with his plan. John will undoubtedly fail because it is an impossible undertaking, and this can be a justification for having him executed. The monarch issues the order after insane laughter breaks out in response to this. John becomes determined to finish the assignment after learning about it in another scene. Foal cautions him that no one has ever successfully tamed a firebird and that doing so may be difficult. The two eventually set out on their quest because John is determined to impress the townsfolk. They go into the woods en route to gather some dream nuts to entice the firebird. John wants to try the nuts because he is inquisitive. However, Foal forbids him from consuming them and warns him that they have sedative effects. After that, they continue walking until they arrive at an oasis in the desert, which is the home of an eagle. There, they see a notice informing them that there is liquid sand nearby. John hides close by after throwing the dream nuts. The gorgeous bird eventually appears from the ground and starts to eat the nuts. As planned, the nuts start to make the bird drunk, but before it nods off, it discovers the two and begins to attack. Numerous times, John and Foal come dangerously close to losing their lives, but they always save one another. The subsequent chase also completely destroys the surrounding area, but in the end, the nuts manage to knock the firebird out, allowing John to chain it up and capture it. The firebird is discovered by John and Foal the following day, looking frail and sobbing a scorching tear. The bird can only be hot when it is free, according to Foal. It loses all of its energy if it stays on the ground for an extended period of time. After hearing this, John chooses to release the bird out of compassion. The moment John removes the restraints, the beast ignites once more and soars to the heavens, but not before leaving John with a flaming feather. Foal advises them to stay away from the kingdom now that the mission has failed, because doing so could lead to John's execution. Our valiant but obstinate protagonist, however, is convinced that the flaming feather would show that they successfully captured the firebird. The king gives the order for their execution after they return. John tries to defend himself as is to be anticipated, saying that he caught the bird but released it out of compassion. The executioner raises an axe to deal the death blow when the king rejects his explanation. But just then, the magnificent firebird makes an appearance, illuminating the realm brightly. It came to repay the favor after hearing John's cries for assistance. When the populace observes the firebird carrying out John's instructions, they are perplexed. As a result, the king grudgingly consents to John's request to live and also hosts a feast in his honor. John is hailed as a hero throughout the kingdom that evening. The king becomes increasingly irritated and is persuaded by his courtier to assign John to the impossible task of locating the king virgin, who lives in an ice kingdom atop a high rock. The king is certain that John will fail, at which point he will have justification to have him put to death. So, John is informed of the king's new assignment the very next day by a messenger, and he readily accepts the challenge. John and Foal finally reach the palace's gate, where the king maiden resides, after traversing the perilous steep rock mountains. However, they discover that a huge wall of ice is blocking the palace, making it impossible for them to enter. However, John is able to break through the ice barrier with the aid of the feather that the firebird gave him, which results in a massive amount of water gushing out. Unfortunately, this completely freezes into an ice ball, sending him plummeting off the cliff. He makes a poor landing, but he avoids harm and survives. John enters the palace in the meantime and encounters the empress there. As the empress informs him that she has no interest in getting married and that there are no more heroes to test his bravery, John immediately jumps off a cliff to save her after introducing himself as a matchmaker sent by the king. The empress, who is moved by his bravery, opens her gown to act as a parachute and begins to slowly descend. But just then, John unintentionally tears the gown, sending them both flying at high speed. They both seem to be doomed to a torturous death until Foal enters bearing a set of brand new wings and saves them both. The three set up camp in the middle of the forest later that evening before carrying on to the kingdom. Foal urges John to leave the empress and go away at this point to save himself, but he refuses. John's loyalty frightens the empress, who has been listening in on their talk. The following morning, when the group reaches the kingdom, John is welcomed as a hero. The fact that John has survived his assignment and everyone is shocked by it only increases the king's animosity towards him. The king must nevertheless give him another reward in spite of this. Later that evening, John decides to pay the empress a visit after fully confessing his emotions for her. When some courtiers enter carrying clothes for her to wear, their reunion is cut short. He takes some flowers and climbs up to her window. The empress eventually meets the king, but is disappointed to discover that he is older than her father. John is envious when he sees the two together outside. The empress is reluctant to get married because she wants to put it off, but the king wants to do so the very next day. She explains that being married with a unique ring is something that her family has always done, but regrettably, the ring washed away in the sea. When the king learns of this, he is furious and assigns John to yet another hard duty. Foal witnesses the ghost of a whale soaring through the sky the same night that he muses over John's strange behavior. Speaking with the sun, moon, and wind, the enemy discovers that the ring is hidden inside the stomach of a massive whale that has now transformed into an island. John and Foal travel to the whale fish in the early morning hours only to discover that she was chained. Foal is able to talk with the whale and discovers that several sailors intentionally put her in this condition as a punishment. Her crime was that she enjoyed consuming multiple ships. She was young and immature at the time, but she is sorry for her behavior now. The whale soon begins to cry, which gives John the idea to make her sneeze and escape the bonds. In order to tickle the whale's guts, they ride right up to its nostrils. The strategy succeeds, and the enormous creature begins to scratch itself with difficulty. In the process, it disengages from all of its bonds and frees the captured ships. After several years, the whale finally presents John and Foal with a priceless ring as a token of appreciation. The two return to the Empress window in the following scene to present the ring. They are not ignored either, as guards and a courtier see them through a scope and rush to seize John. The disturbance causes the king to awaken, and he quickly grabs his gun and heads for the window. The king immediately shoots him after noticing Foal. While falsely accusing John of abducting the king's maiden, the guards break into the bedchamber and take him into custody. Following this, the king prepares to wed the empress, but to buy some extra time, she insists that he revive himself using a recipe that her grandmother taught her. She demands that he take a bath in one cauldron of boiling water, one of icy water, and one of boiling milk. Though the plan is clever, John ends up with even worse issues as a result. A courtier suggests to the king that he test the cauldrons on John first, sensing that it might be a trap. The empress reveals in full secrecy that she is aware of a way to counteract the boiling contents effects at night. She explains that the lethal effects can be neutralized by placing her grandmother's ring in the first cauldron, a feather from a firebird in the second, and the flower of life and death that blooms at the end of the world in the third cauldron. Hold on an sec. That third one appears to be somewhat elusive. She says their ability to carry out this strategy successfully will determine whether John survives. Foal, who was wounded earlier by a gunshot, is aware that the mission is dangerous and could end in his death, but he nonetheless embarks on it for the sake of his best buddy. To search for the bloom. He can no longer fly, so he uses his lightning speed to get to the edge of the planet. When Foal ultimately locates the flower, it informs him that anyone who picks it would soon die. The adversary plucks the flower to save John despite the dire warning. The king instructs John to leap into the cauldrons in the morning, then hypocritically claims that he is offering him a chance at redemption. The latter declares his love for the empress since he thinks he is about to pass away. The empress skillfully throws the ring into the first cauldron as he dives into the hot water, allowing John escape unhurt. The firebird drops a feather into the second cauldron, once more protecting John. In the meantime, Foal delivers the flower just in time to save John. After successfully completing his rejuvenation, John is brought before the empress in the third and last cauldron. She is astounded by his change. The king climbs into the first cauldron because he is also astounded and thinks that the recipe really does make people younger. But as soon as he does, a huge bubble appears and swallows him whole. The kingdom's citizens merely laugh at his misfortune and begin singing in support of John. In the meantime, the empress and John notice that Foal has vanished and begin looking for him. Soon after picking the flower, they discover him sitting calmly and waiting to die. The flower's warning was actually just a test to see how brave the person who selected it was, the empress says. Before he left, she could have told him that. She also makes it apparent that Foal would have actually perished if he had not pulled the trigger. Now though, he won't. When Foal hears this, he joyfully stands up and embraces his best friend. In the climactic scene, the people cheer for John and demand that he take over as king. He gladly accepts and promises to use all of his strength to defend the realm. The movie ends as John and the empress finally get married and take over the kingdom as the newly crowned king and queen.
Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you can watch more videos like this. Thanks for watching.